When the Nephrolink came back online and 40 dialysis patients began their morning sessions without incident, nobody on the fourth floor of Wellstone Regional Medical Centre felt much like celebrating. The morning was already complicated. Half the overnight shift hadn't left yet. There were 6 unanswered pages from the Regional Health Authority sitting on the duty manager's desk. And somewhere in the building a woman was walking toward the Biomedical Services office with a set of questions she was not going to enjoy having answered. Genevieve Strand had been Chief Operating Officer of Wellstone Health Group for 11 years. She had survived 2 board restructurings, 1 provincial audit, and a nurses' strike that had lasted 12 days. She was not a woman who got rattled, but she had walked through the main entrance at 6:42 that morning to find her facilities director avoiding her eyes, her biomedical lead standing outside her office with a thick folder of logs and 40 patients being monitored very carefully by nurses who had not gone home. She gathered every department head in the conference room beside the nurses' station and asked her question once quietly, the way she always asked questions when she already suspected. She wasn't going to like the answer. Who kept our patients safe last night? No one spoke for a moment. Then Priya Nath, head of biomedical engineering at Wellstone for the past 7 years, set her folder on the table and answered plainly. The orderly you fired at 3 in the morning, she said. His name is Darius Mensah. We want you to sit with that for a second, because what happened in that conference room over the next hour, and what had unfolded in the 12 hours before it, is exactly the kind of story that sounds too clean to be real. Until you understand who Darius Mensah actually is, and what it cost him to stand quietly in that supply corridor, with his badge, sitting on a cart someone else would push in the morning. The story begins the way it always does with Darius, with a routine that most people would not think twice about. He arrived for his evening shift at Wellstone at 11:15, took his cart from the supply room, and spent the first 20 minutes of his shift doing the same thing he had done every working night for the past 2 years, checking in on his father. Augustine Mensah was 74 years old and lived in the long-term care wing on the 2nd floor, 3 minutes by elevator from the supply room where Darius kept his cart. He had suffered a serious stroke 4 years earlier that had left him with limited mobility on his left side and a memory that came and went like weather. On good nights, Augustine recognized his son and held a whole conversation about hockey or the neighborhood they had lived in together when Darius was young. On difficult nights, he looked at Darius with a polite and gentle confusion that was somehow harder to bear than anger would have been. That night was a quiet one. Augustine was already asleep when Darius looked in. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching his father breathe, then went to collect his cart. He had sent a voice message to his daughter before his shift started. Amara was 10 years old and staying with a neighbor across the hall that night, as she did on evenings when Darius worked. She had left him a drawing on the kitchen counter of 2 people standing in front of what appeared to be a large hospital, with the word Dade written above the taller figure in uneven capital letters, the way she always wrote it. He had taken a photograph of the drawing before leaving. 8 years earlier, Darius Mensah had been a senior controls architect at MedAxis Engineering Solutions, a biomedical technology firm based in Waterloo, Ontario. His work focused on the software systems that ran dialysis equipment, specifically the integrated network controllers that allowed hospitals to manage multiple machines from a single point. He had spent 6 years at MedAxis, and the system he was most proud of was a monitoring protocol he had built from scratch after a hospital in Vancouver lost critical patient data during a network outage. The protocol was designed to keep patient session data safe even when the primary network failed. The development team had named it internally after the last checkpoint in its architecture, the Mensah Sink. His wife Kezia had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer 3.5 years into his time at MedAxis. Darius had managed both things for a year, the work and the hospital visits and the school pickups for Amara, until he understood that managing both was no longer serving either. He had requested a leave of absence, handed off every active project with thorough documentation, and gone home to be present for however much time Kezia had left. She had died 16 months later. By then, his professional certifications were lapsed. The industry had moved forward in the way that industries always do, and the contacts he might have called had scattered across 3 provinces. He had his father to look after and a daughter who had just turned 7 and needed someone to be reliably home in the morning, Reliably home for dinner, reliably there. The custodial position at Wellstone had opened at exactly the right time. It paid adequately. It kept his hours consistent. It put him 3 floors below the man he used to be, and 30 feet from the father he had chosen to stay close to. He had never once apologized for the choice. What stung on the occasions it did sting was the assumption, the way people decided what he knew and what he was capable of based on the badge clipped to his shirt. He had learned to carry it quietly, but he had never stopped paying attention. The 4th-floor dialysis unit at Wellstone housed the NephroLink Central Controller, a $6.5 million networked management system that coordinated dialysis sessions for up to 40 patients at once. The hospital had purchased it 3 years earlier, through a procurement process overseen by Royce Davenport, Director of Facilities and Procurement, who had been with Wellstone for 9 years and had the particular self-confidence of someone who had never been seriously questioned. The NephroLink was critical infrastructure. If it failed mid-cycle, it could deliver incorrect flow parameters to every machine in the unit. The system's predictive alerts were its first line of defense. Darius was passing the entrance to the dialysis unit just before midnight, mopping a stretch of hallway near the clean supply room, when he heard it. Not an alarm. Something quieter. A pattern in the alert tones coming from the monitoring station. Too short, too regular, cycling in a way that wasn't right. He stood still for a moment and listened, the way a person listens when they recognize something they haven't heard in years and can't quite place where they know it from. Then he placed it. It was the secondary alert rhythm that the NephroLink used when its internal sync process was failing to resolve. He had written that rhythm himself. The machine was trying to tell someone it was in trouble. He found Perry Chalk at the nursing station just outside the unit. Perry was a biomedical technician who had been at Wellstone for 4 years and was at that moment reading something on his phone. Darius told him what he had heard. He described the alert pattern specifically, the interval, the repetition, which tone was cycling out of sequence. Perry looked at him for a long second, glanced at the orderly badge, and told him the unit was fine. He told Darius to keep his cart away from the corridor entrances. Darius went back to his cart. He didn't argue. He positioned himself where he could still see the monitoring station through the glass. 9 minutes later, the NephroLink threw a cascade of error codes that lit up every screen in the nurse's station simultaneously. Perry called Priya Nath. Priya arrived 11 minutes after that, still pulling her hair back as she came through the stairwell door, already reading the error feed on her phone. She was quick and precise, and had the focused calm of someone who had trained herself over many years to think clearly when rooms were loud and people were scared. She read the fault log, checked the machine state, and understood immediately that the error was not where it appeared to be. The codes pointed to a hardware fault in one of the subunits, but that reading didn't match what she was seeing in the temperature data. She looked up and noticed Darius hadn't moved. She walked over and asked directly what he had seen before the alarm. He told her. He didn't pad it or minimize it. He described the sync failure pattern, the specific interval of the alert cycle, and his best assessment of what it meant. The controller was receiving conflicting signals from its satellite monitors in pods 3 and 4, probably due to a firmware mismatch introduced during the last software update. The actual fault wasn't in the hardware. It was in the handshake protocol between the primary controller and the pod-level units. Priya watched him as he spoke. She had been running the biomedical team at Wellstone long enough to know what panic sounded like when it was pretending to be expertise. What she was hearing was not that. He was describing the system in its own language. He was talking in specifics. She asked him where he had learned to read a NephroLink fault pattern. He said he used to work in biomedical systems engineering. Nothing more. She made a decision. She sealed the access corridor, created a formal consultation log, noting that she was bringing in a supervised technical resource, and asked Darius to walk her through what he was seeing. They had been working for 22 minutes when Royce Davenport arrived. Royce was 53 years old, broad-shouldered, and moved through the hospital's administrative spaces, like a man who had never once been asked to justify his presence. He had been woken by the facility's alert, and had arrived in the state that Darius recognized immediately, irritated at having been disturbed, looking for someone to be responsible for that irritation. He saw Darius standing near the NephroLink controller, and his expression closed. He ordered Darius out of the restricted area, When Priya explained the consultation log and what Darius had identified, Royce waved it off and told her to restart the system and get the unit back online before the morning shift came in. Darius told him that a forced restart without isolating the fault would corrupt the session data for 12 patients currently mid-cycle. At the next treatment round, the system could pull incorrect parameters for every machine in pods 3 and 4. That wasn't a paperwork problem. That was a patient safety problem. Royce stepped forward until he was close enough that Darius could see the irritation sitting behind his eyes. He looked at the orderly badge. He said that a man whose job was the hallways was not going to tell him how to manage $6.5 million worth of medical equipment. And then the screen behind him updated its fault log, and for a single line in the diagnostic trace, listing the protocol currently running the sync architecture, a name appeared. Mensah Sync Protocol E3.4. Priya saw it. Royce did not. She caught Darius in the supply corridor a minute later, before he had reached his cart. She asked him directly. He told her. He had been the lead controls architect on the NephroLink development team at Med-Axis Engineering Solutions. The Mensah Sync was a protocol he had written specifically to prevent the kind of data loss that would happen if the system failed mid-cycle. His name was in the source code because he had put it there as a version tag 8 years ago, when the system was first deployed. Every upgrade since had built on top of his architecture. The current version still ran his core sync logic at its base layer. He had no current credentials to touch the system officially. He understood that completely. But everything he did that night would be documented, and if Priya kept the consultation log open, he could walk her team through the fault isolation without touching a single setting himself. She took him back inside. Genevieve Strand arrived at 5:20 in the morning. She had heard the system was down and had rearranged her day accordingly. She walked onto the 4th floor, looking the way she always looked, composed, decisive, and already 3 steps ahead of the current conversation. What she saw when she came through the unit doors was a man in a custodial uniform standing beside the NephroLink control panel with Priya Nath at his shoulder. Royce was at Genevieve's side before she had taken 6 steps. His version of events took less than a minute. Unauthorized access, a liability risk. A facilities worker who had inserted himself into a critical clinical system without authorization, under the cover of a consultation log that had been issued improperly. Priya tried to explain. Genevieve stopped her before she had finished her first sentence. She looked at Darius. She asked whether he held a current professional engineering designation or a valid biomedical equipment technologist certification. He answered honestly. His credentials had lapsed. He had been out of the industry for several years, but his understanding of the system hadn't gone anywhere, and every step he had taken tonight was documented in Priya's law. Genevieve looked at the orderly badge. She looked at the mop cart parked by the corridor entrance. She said that previous experience, however extensive, did not constitute authorization to operate restricted clinical equipment inside her facility. She told him to hand over his badge. Darius unclipped it from his shirt. He set it down on the cart without dropping his eyes from hers. "You've just removed the only person in this building. Who knows why that machine is giving you false readings?" he said. Before he left, he folded a piece of paper and handed it to Priya. It listed 3 readings she needed to watch, and the threshold the controller could not cross before it needed to be shut down manually. Royce took the note out of her hand and dropped it in the waste bin beside the nursing station, without reading it. Darius walked out through the main entrance in the pre-dawn gray and sent a text to his neighbor, asking if Amara could stay a little longer in the morning. What no one in that unit had accounted for was the system's own record. Every action taken during those hours had been logged with a timestamp. It's less than 40 minutes after Genevieve ordered the NephroLink restarted. The readings on pods 3 and 4 began to climb again. The morning shift came on. A nurse named Lorette caught the first patient, a 67-year-old man in pod 4, whose blood pressure had dropped further than it should have in the first 20 minutes of his session. All 8 affected machines were paused in time. No patient was seriously harmed, but the regional health authority was on the phone within the hour, and the manufacturer's technical team was in Montreal and couldn't be on site for at least 3 days. 40 patients, 3 days. Genevieve stood in front of the morning leadership team and asked her question for the second time. This time, she already knew what the answer was going to be. Priya pulled up the fault log and walked the room through it. She showed them Darius's name in the diagnostic trace. She opened the original MedAxis engineering documentation on her laptop and put it on the wall screen. Darius Mensah, lead controls architect. Nephrolink Central System V1.0. Then a junior technician flagged something else entirely. 3 of the replacement circuit boards installed in the Nephrolink subcontroller units during the last maintenance cycle had no verifiable manufacturer certification numbers. The supplier was listed as Meridian Biomedical Parts, a company that, after 20 minutes of checking, turned out to be registered to the brother-in-law of Royce Davenport. The room went very quiet. Royce said the parts had been approved through standard procurement. Priya asked to see the certification documentation. The only paperwork that existed carried Royce's signature and an electronic approval bearing Genevieve's name. An approval she had signed, she admitted quietly, as part of a bulk authorization package she had not individually reviewed. Genevieve did not look at Royce when she said it. She looked at the wall screen where Darius's name was still displayed above his original engineering credentials. She found him at his kitchen table at 8:15 that morning, making breakfast for Amara before the school bus came. He answered the door in a t-shirt and jeans. His daughter stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at Genevieve with the frank curiosity of a 10-year-old who had not yet learned to hide her opinions. Genevieve's apology was genuine in intention and imprecise in execution. It acknowledged the situation more than it acknowledged the person standing in front of her. Darius listened until she finished. Then he asked her one question. Had she read the consultation log Priya had filed? Not a summary, the actual log line by line. She admitted she had not. He told her he would return under 4 conditions. First, a formal independent consulting contract, not a custodial position with unofficial responsibilities attached to it. Second, Priya and every member of the team who had told the truth that night would be fully protected from any form of retaliation. Third, every procurement record connected to Royce Davenport's tenure would go through an independent external audit. Fourth, Darius alone would have documented authority to suspend operation of the Nephrolink whenever he judged it clinically unsafe, regardless of what anyone above him on the organizational chart wanted in the moment. Genevieve pushed back on the third condition. An external audit during an active contract negotiation with the regional authority would invite scrutiny the board was already anxious to avoid. Darius told her the scrutiny was already on its way. A machine does not generate false safety readings by accident. Someone had made a deliberate choice to let it happen, and the audit would tell her who and for how long. The fourth condition was the one that mattered most, he said, because a person who could only raise a safety concern quietly, after the fact in private, wasn't actually protecting anyone. He needed to be able to stop the line in front of everyone in the moment without waiting for approval from someone whose quarterly numbers depended on the unit staying open. Amara had come to stand beside her father during the last part of this. She was eating a piece of toast and listening with complete attention. Genevieve looked at the two of them and found she had no real argument left. Constance Yoon, chair of the Wellstone Health Group Board, called her while she was still standing in Darius's kitchen and told her, in the careful language of someone who was not making a suggestion, that the board had been briefed by the regional health authority and that accepting reasonable terms from the technical consultant was not optional. Genevieve signed the agreement at Darius's kitchen table. He returned to the hospital that evening with his old tool bag and the termination notice folded in his jacket pocket. He walked directly to the 4th floor. Royce was waiting outside the biomedical services office, arms folded, voice still carrying the register of someone who expected to be obeyed. Darius held up the signed contract without speaking. "From here," he said, "you're the one who needs authorization to get in the way." Before anything else, he asked the team to run a complete data backup. Royce pushed for a clean software reinstall immediately, the fastest way to restore normal operation, he said. Darius understood what a clean reinstall would also erase. He said the backup came first and the contract said so. Working alongside Priya and Perry Chalk, who had been very quiet since Genevieve's morning meeting, and was now precisely, carefully helpful in a way that had something of an apology in it, Darius moved through the system layer by layer. The software was running correctly. The fault wasn't in the code. It was in the components the code was talking to. When they opened the subcontroller housings, they found what Darius had suspected. The circuit boards installed during the last maintenance cycle looked correct from a distance. The manufacturer labels were the right color, the right format, the right font, but when Darius peeled one corner back with a gloved finger, a different label appeared underneath. Cheaper components, uncertified, running in a $6.5 million medical system and reporting that everything was fine when it was not. He photographed each one before removing it. These parts had been telling the NephroLink that temperatures were safe when they were not. Every inspection report that had cleared the system as fully operational for the past 18 months had been in effect a report that the machine itself had been forced to produce based on false information. It had been given no choice but to repeat. Royce said they were approved substitutes. Darius asked for the technical certification. The only documentation available was what had already been established. Royce's signature and Genevieve's electronic approval on a batch authorization she had never actually read. Then every file connected to the case disappeared from the hospital server. All of it, at once the technology department confirmed the deletion command had come from an executive-level account. Royce turned immediately toward Darius. A man who had written the original software, he suggested, could easily have built a back door. Darius noted the timestamp on the deletion. It had occurred 38 minutes before his access credentials had been issued that evening. Whoever had run the deletion had prepared for it before Darius had walked back through the front door. Royce's confidence began to rebuild visibly in the room. No procurement records, no audit trail, just the word of an orderly against the word of a director who had been at Wellstone for 9 years. What Royce didn't know, what almost no one in the room knew, was that the original NephroLink deployment had included a feature that never made it into any subsequent documentation. A hardware-level backup module, isolated from the main network, designed to preserve a redundant log of all system events in the event of a network failure. Darius had insisted on it during the original development process after the Vancouver incident, and it had been included in the first-generation hardware. It had been dropped from every user manual and technical spec sheet after the second software upgrade. But the physical module had never been removed from the units themselves. It was still there, covered in dust, behind a panel that had not been opened since installation. Perry found it. He and Priya opened the housing carefully, documented the seal condition before breaking it, and Darius walked Perry through the retrieval process using an old laptop Priya had in a storage cabinet, one that still ran the legacy diagnostic software the module required. It took 19 minutes. For most of those 19 minutes, the room held a particular kind of silence that has nothing performative in it. Just people waiting to find out if something is going to work. It worked. The archive loaded line by line. It contained time-stamped records going back to the original installation. And in those records, 9 months earlier, Royce Davenport had disabled the NephroLink's predictive alert system. He had altered the supplier codes attached to the replacement parts to obscure their origin. He had done both things in a pattern that became unmistakable once Priya cross-referenced it against the maintenance calendar. Disabled before every scheduled inspection, reactivated after. Never enough time for a routine audit to catch the gap. It had not been a lapse in judgment. It had been a system built and maintained carefully over the better part of 2 years. The invoices Meridian Biomedical parts had submitted to Wellstone were priced within 10% of what genuine certified components would have cost. The difference had been profit. Quiet, undetected profit, extracted from a hospital's equipment budget, while 40 patients sat in chairs and trusted that the machines keeping them alive had been properly maintained. Royce made one final attempt. He surfaced an old employment record from MedAxis, showing that Darius Mensah had left the company in the middle of an active project, framing it as a pattern, a man who walked out when things got complicated. Darius did not deflect the question. He explained to the room that he had left MedAxis when his wife received a terminal diagnosis, that he had completed every active deliverable before his final day, that every project in his portfolio had been formally handed off to the colleagues who succeeded him. Priya had anticipated this. She produced a letter from the former technical director of MedAxis, signed and dated, confirming that Darius Mensah had fulfilled every professional obligation before his departure, and that the Mensah Sync protocol had continued running without modification for 5 years after he left. Perry Chalk, who had once told Darius to keep his cart away from the corridor entrance, stood up and said the only thing that needed to be said. He left a job to take care of his family. You stayed in yours to steal from ours. Constance Yoon arrived with 2 other board members at 7 that morning. She asked Royce in front of the room to explain why a supplier with a direct family connection to a Wellstone director had been awarded sole source procurement contracts, totaling more than $2 million over 4 years, without competitive bidding, without independent verifications, and without a single compliance flag in any of the routine reviews during that period. Royce's answer did not survive contact with the question. Genevieve was required to acknowledge before the full board that she had terminated a technical consultant based on the badge on his shirt rather than the documentation in front of her. She said it without softening it, which was the first decision she had made in 48 hours that Darius respected. Royce was suspended on the spot. His accounts were frozen. The procurement file was handed to an external auditor and the Ontario Health Ministry's compliance office. What remained was 40 patients and a system that needed to be operational by morning rounds. Darius drew up the component replacement plan. Certified replacement boards, sourced through an emergency channel from the manufacturer's Toronto distribution hub, were on a truck by 11. Priya coordinated with the patient care team. Perry rebuilt the alert system configurations from the archived baseline Darius had identified in the backup module. The work was steady and quiet, and focused in the way that work gets when people have stopped thinking about who gets credit and started thinking only about what needs to be done. The truck arrived at 2:15 in the morning. By 5:40, the Nephrolink was running clean. At 6 o'clock, the morning dialysis sessions began on schedule, all 40 stations operational, all readings within tolerance, the alert system functioning exactly as it had been designed to function. The nurses who had stayed past the end of their shift to monitor the patients stood in the corridor and let out a collective breath that had been held, it seemed, for a very long time. Genevieve offered Darius the position of Director of Biomedical Engineering 3 days later. He turned it down. He had not done any of this to move from one kind of dismissal to another, from being invisible in a custodial uniform to being visible only because his title had changed. He didn't want Genevieve's office. He wanted something she could not give him. He established Mensah Biomedical Group that month. A small consultancy, 1 man 2 laptops, a letter of incorporation filed with the province of Ontario, and a clear purpose, helping hospitals find what was wrong with their critical equipment before a patient paid the price for it. Wellstone Regional Medical Centre became his first client under a transparent contract reviewed quarterly in a meeting open to any staff member who wanted to attend. Priya Nath was promoted to Chief of Biomedical Services. One of her first acts was to rewrite Wellstone's safety escalation policy. Under the new protocol, any employee, in any department, at any level, could file a documented safety concern and trigger a formal review without requiring a supervisor's approval. The process was called the Open Signal Protocol. Perry Chalk led the first staff training session under the new policy. He told the story of the night shift. He told it without embellishment, because it didn't need any, and he made a point, every time he told it, of starting not with Genevieve's question, but with the moment in the corridor. A man with a cart who heard something nobody else was listening for, and decided it was worth saying something anyway. If you stay with us on this channel, this is the kind of story we're going to keep telling you. Not because it's rare, but because it's far more common than the people in corner offices would like to admit. The person who first notices that something is wrong is almost never the person with the largest title in the room. Sometimes it ties they're the one everyone else has already decided doesn't need to be listened to. On the evening after it was all over, Darius picked up Amara from school and brought her home. She saw the new consulting badge on the kitchen counter beside his old orderly badge. She picked up the orderly badge and turned it over in her hands and asked if he was going to throw it away now. He told her no. He told her that badge was a reminder that the value of a person's knowledge had nothing to do with what was printed on the piece of plastic clipped to their shirt, that the people who had looked at it and stopped looking had not been wrong about his uniform. They had only been wrong about what a uniform means. She set the badge back down beside the new one, very deliberately, so they sat side by side. That evening, Darius went to visit his father. Augustine was having a good night. He listened to the whole story, and when Darius finished, he said, with the directness that the stroke had never managed to take from him, that it sounded like his son had done the right thing. That was all Darius needed to hear. In the dialysis unit on the 4th floor of Wellstone Regional Medical Centre, the NephroLink ran smoothly through the night, its alert system cycling properly, its backup module quietly recording every reading the way it had been designed to do, years ago, by a man who had understood from the very beginning that the most important safeguard in any system is the one that keeps working, even when no one in the building remembers it is there.